Welcome. My name is Laura Moody, and I am the Executive Director of iFeeder, the Institute for Feed Education and Research. I'm joined today by Matt Sutton-Vermillion as the Principal for the Context Network and Emily Johans as the Senior Manager of Sustainability Sourcing at Nestle. And today we are exploring how downstream expectations of consumer product goods companies impact the feed industry. With a mission to advance the understanding and trust in a sustainable feed and pet food supply chain, iFeeder is using this webinar to raise awareness and inform our efforts to create a sustainability roadmap. And that effort is going to be to assess industry and stakeholder sustainability needs so that we can begin to create a toolkit and resources that the industry can provide. It will include a meta-analysis of existing data sets so that can inform where we have gaps in information and research as we go forward. At this point, I'm going to turn the webinar over to Matt so he can give us some opening insights into downstream expectations and why they're so important to the feed industry. Matt?
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you and your members. When we think about the driving forces behind sustainability and why that's important to the U.S. feed industry, regardless of whether that feed is going into animal protein production or aquaculture or companion animals, it doesn't matter. The driving force behind this is following the money. If you follow the money, this goes back to what is called ESG ratings and environmental, social, and governance criteria. An equivalent of this is kind of similar to a credit score that you and your household would earn. Except in this case, the credit score is on firms and their deliverables for intangible assets. It has to do with the impact that they're making on the environment, the impact that they're making on society, and the quality of governance that they're delivering to their organization. If you boil it all down, what ESG ratings are helping investors do is to identify their risks, the risk of their brand showing up on the nightly news, and being headlined for something that could be less than ideal. So it's about risk, it's about impact. And how are they used? They're used in many different ways. We'll go through a couple of examples. The logos up top just give you a few examples of incredibly powerful and high quality global ESG ratings firms. But they're used to assess where companies are performing, the trends, the investment worthiness of them, and benchmarking across different aspects. Two highly relevant examples of ESG ratings firms that aren't pure ESG ratings firms, but are pure plays when it comes to the importance to iFeeder investors are the BBFAW and FAIR. The BBFAW is the business benchmark on animal welfare. Nikki Amos and several others got together many years ago and they said, how can we as an organization or develop an organization that helps identify how firms are taking care of their animals? This particular piece started benchmarking brands, publicly traded brands, and took a look at how they were caring for the animals. Now, I realize this is a stretch from feed, but this is so directly into the wheelhouse of your investors and what's core to their customers and their customers' customers that it is relevant. The other key piece is that early work was influenced by Jeremy Culler, who's the principal of Culler Initiative, that is in charge of FAIR, the Food Animal Investment Risk and Return Organization. There are over $40 trillion in assets under management of this initiative. It has been climbing like a rocket for the last 5 years. And the quality of firms that are represented and the ability for firms to perform on this rating and their benchmarking to see where they get is very, very real to many, many people across the globe. These are just two examples. We could talk for an hour on them alone, but we're not going to. Now, when it comes to commitments, because if you think about ESG ratings relate to what is the promise. And when it comes to the E, the environmental promise that people are making, they are greenhouse gas commitments. We see them blowing up in space every day. We see these things coming through, and we're wondering, what the heck does that mean? How does that work? How is their promise? What is their promise? The essence of a GHG commitment is that a brand takes a look at its entire supply chain and it says, I am committed to measuring, reporting, and verifying the reduction of CO2 equivalent emissions into the atmosphere. So if you look at animal protein, or if you look at the feed that goes into companion animal or aquaculture, that commitment, when you go upstream and you take a look, about 40 to 50%, sometimes even a little higher than that, but 40 to 50% of that greenhouse gas footprint is associated with the feed supply chain. Now, these ESG ratings firms that we were talking about before, they're taking a look at those commitments and they're qualifying them and they're saying, well, they're making great progress. They aren't making good progress. They get a higher score, they get a lower score. When interviewed, 80% of the companies with revenues greater than 250 million across the globe that have set GHG reduction goals. 25% of them don't know how they're going to achieve them. So they're looking upstream. They're looking at their feed supply chains and saying, hey, this is the big leg of the Pareto. We need to go after it. We need to figure out how to communicate with these people, how to understand how they're reducing their footprint and to get better knowledge around it. So you're going to hear some terms around scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. And these are the emission boundaries for greenhouse gases. So if you take a look at a feed manufacturer, a feed manufacturer's scope 1 is the facilities that they own and run. And it's the energy and every greenhouse gas emission associated with it, the direct emissions. Scope 2 is all the energy that is purchased and everything that comes in and associated with impacting their greenhouse gas footprint of those facilities again. Scope 3 is the supply chain that comes into that. So your members, scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, everybody's looking back upstream. And if you take a look at the McDonald's of the world, the Walmarts of the world, the Nestle's and other big brands, they're looking upstream at you and you're their scope 3. So it's all relative to who you are and where you're coming from when it comes to that. We'll dig into more detail later on in your strategy to clarify that even more. So the drivers of this are how we getting accountability for the commitments. The strategies that they're using to execute on those is they're looking at carbon offsets, they're looking at fleet electrification, they've changed out all their light bulbs, they've done all the low-hanging fruit, and now they're looking upstream at you guys. And they're saying, how can we get this better? How can we do better? This slide just represents a couple of incredibly high-level, global, best-in-class companies and their brand commitments. I'm not going to go through detailed discussion around each of them, but you and your members can take a look at them. The key takeaway from this is that these are the global leaders. These are the people these are the organizations and the brands that are doing high quality, best in class, world class delivery and execution of strategy towards this. It's not that they've delivered it, it's that they're on their journey to get it done. They're trying to achieve their goals and they're delivering on efforts that are leading indicators towards that performance now. And they're hoping to get their lagging indicators as they come. The reason this is important to your members is because it's their desires that are coming back to your members saying, this is why it's important to us. Now, if you take a look at some of those brands and many, many others, and you think about where they congregate or aggregate, and you think about how they're getting together and working together and collaborating, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development is one example of great work being done by incredible, powerful brands and smart people. It's gaining positive momentum. It's evolving significantly from where it has come from and its early work that, to be honest, looked a little messy and was challenging for many people in the animal protein industry to deal with. And especially if you take a look at that proteins impact framework and the 7 pathways for business transformation, but they're evolving significantly. They've undergone some more evolution within their organization. That responsible meat strategy that they're bringing forward is very strategic in its thought process, very engaging across the supply chain, and is meant to have a direct impact on the feed footprint as well as other characteristics of ESG. The carbon partnership is an important one to have on your team's radar. It's a strategic alliance between the WBCSD and the USFRA. And its intention is to have boots on the ground for crop and land practices that lead to carbon capture and value for the feed supply chain in the US. If we take a look at another classic multi-stakeholder initiative, it originated over in Arkansas, associated with initial investments from the Walton Family Foundation. And it's no surprise that that was a focal point to help bring together insights to inform the Walmart strategy. It's led to things like the Gigaton Project and many others. It's led to development of indicators and metrics across many sectors, including feed industry. So it's important for you and your members as you think about how those constellations are forming, and including the brands that are associated with them, of how they engage and when you engage. On a more focused basis, U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Poultry and Egg has gone through their initial public comments for their framework on sustainability, their pillars, their indicators, and their metrics to measure, report, and lead to increased trust, reduced risk, and confidence in the U.S. poultry and egg supply chain. The U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef has been underway for many years and is making great progress towards their targets and goals that they're working to establish that are associated with their already established indicators and metrics. The North American Meat Institute has gone through their first public comments on their framework for sustainability that is associated with their bold goals for the Protein Pact. Field to Market has a rich history of developing science-based metrics associated with the feed footprint, and has done some tremendous work and is scaling now into the millions of acres. The dairy industry under Dairy Management Incorporated and the the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy has also made tremendous strides in their framework and their measuring, reporting, and verifying progress around environmental and social indicators and metrics. Now I'd like to hand it back off to you, Laura, so you can have a fun conversation with Emily Johannes, Senior Manager of Sustainable Sourcing for Nestle.
Emily, it's great to get a chance to catch up with you today on downstream expectations from Nestle's viewpoint. I was reading an article this morning in Food Strategy, and Robert Earhart on Nestle's team said sustainability is no longer a nice to have, it's a must have. It's a license to operate. So as we think about that relative to Nestle and the feed industry, why is the food footprint of your supply chains important to your organization?
Well, thank you, Laura, and thanks for having me as a part of this discussion. I'm really pleased to be here to speak to your audience today. And it might seem odd, right? Why is a CPG company selling products like Stouffer's lasagna and DiGiorno pizza to consumers really focused all the way throughout the supply chain back at where the feed is grown for a lot of our great ingredients? And it really is based on what Robert said, because as a corporate largest food and beverage company in the world, we really take seriously the fact that we provide great tasting products to our consumers every day. And those products contain great tasting ingredients like cheese and meats and lots of dairy products. And so we're very heavily, as an organization in Nestle, dependent on the feed industry because we source a lot of the ingredients that you all support in making those animals healthy and nutritious, right? So it is all interrelated from that standpoint. And the reason why we really say that sustainability is no longer a nice to have, it's a need to have, is exactly to Matt's point about all the great information that he shared. We published as Nestle globally our net zero roadmap in December of 2020. And this laid out a strategy and action plans along the way to achieve actually net zero emissions by 2050. And admittedly, someone could ask, well, 2050 seems like a really long way away. How are you going to get there? And that speaks to the importance of the term roadmap. Roadmap sets out those interim targets and interim activities that you're going to do to achieve progress over time. Because we know we have to have, break these big ambitions down into these goals so that we can actually get the work done on the ground. And that's very much what we're focused on today at Nestle. And really what impacts the feed industry, I think, in a good way, is the kinds of investments and infrastructure that we're working on directly with farmers to try to make this happen in the field where the feed is grown. It's a big part of our initiatives is to support that in agriculture, to support that journey, and to make sure that we can achieve these goals together with the feed industry.
Great. Another question, you mentioned roadmaps, right? And so in another virtual forum I was participating in, one of the feed industry CEOs was talking about the commitments that are being made around climate in particular. And with those commitments, as we heard Matt say, we don't necessarily know how we're going to get there, right? And so roadmaps are really important to the commitment process. And as we think about targets and goals, and it's one of the reasons we're taking on the sustainability roadmap here. So what are best practices that organizations like iFeeder and AFIA can use in developing their roadmap based on what you guys have learned at Nestle?
Sure, Laura, and you're exactly right. And I couldn't give you more credit as a group for working on your roadmap. And I think there's a few things that we really are focused on here at Nestle. And what I would offer is one, it has to be science-based. And I know a lot of the work you all are doing is to do meta-analysis and look at all the great data that is out there. And so that's a really important part of how to tackle that roadmap, what it should be founded in, and it should be founded in the best available science that we have. But in saying that, I will also say a best practice is not to have analysis paralysis, right? That at some point in time, what a climate roadmap and commitment is a bit of progress, not perfection, right? So what we want to do is be able to make the right activities on the ground at the right places, knowing that it will never be perfect. And so I think that's really, as we look at our supply chains and how we engage with our suppliers and vendors, we are looking for roadmaps that, quite frankly, we know aren't going to be perfect, but are actually committing the organization to a continuous improvement process.
Do you have any other advice as we kind of wrap up our conversation and experiences that you would like to share with AFI and iFeeder members as we take this sustainability journey?
Sure. We could definitely talk, I'm sure, all day about all the great things that are happening across U.S. agriculture. But I think one of the things that I would highlight that's maybe just a perspective from Nestle is how broad we are in sourcing our ingredients from the animal industry. And we also source and bring in a lot of ingredients for our pet food business as well. And so we're just really focused on how all of this interrelates. And so I just encourage AFIA and this initiative, as well as all the members, to think about not reinventing that wheel, not duplicating efforts. Again, we've done so much great work. We want to leverage that as an industry. We're here as Nestle to help support that and help cheerlead that. And I just think it's really, I'd want to leave you with the fact that, as a feed industry, you're serving a number of the animal livestock sectors across the great ingredients that we source. And so there's great opportunity to collaborate and help each other in that effort. And certainly we'd expect that, we really do leverage the great work that's been done.
Great, thanks, Emily. As we wrap up, Matt, do you have a question from your perspective that you want to give Emily a chance to answer?
Sure, thanks, Laura. Emily, when you think about past experiences and you think about where the U.S. feed industry is coming from and trying to go towards in that development of that roadmap, let's just pretend like you had a magic wand and you could wave a magic wand and that magic wand could enable the U.S. feed industry to deliver something to you in 2022. What would it be that they tied a bow around and handed to you?
Oh, that's an amazing question, Matt. And I love the opportunity just for a minute to to think about this. For us at Nestle, and again, it links back to how we're approaching our roadmap, is we are more empowered to tell the great story of the work that's being done in the feed industry when we have as much information and data as we can share. And so I think my magic wand would be some easy way to have aggregated, data that tells us what we know to be true, which is that farmers are doing excellent work on the ground, and that we have an opportunity to have that at a more regional and local level. Today, I'll admit, as a global company, we're pretty forced to use sort of national averages for a lot of the great communications that we like to make about our products and about our ingredients. What we'd love to get to eventually is much more data sharing and communication on the great work that's happening in that aggregated way. I do want to emphasize that this is my magic wand, of course, and I'd have all this information at the ready with a click of a button, but it is not my information. It is not Nestle's information. It is absolutely the farm's information. But we do want to feel like we're all empowered in this supply chain to send that great story forward. And so I just think the more we can do that, the better off we would be.
Thanks,
Well,
Em.
thanks, Matt and Emily, for joining us today. It was really great to have you guys a part of this webinar series and our conversation. Again, the reason that we are pursuing this webinar series is so that we can start to gather information and create awareness and educate the feed industry folks on sustainability. And it's in preparation for the Sustainability Roadmap project that we're launching in the next few weeks. We recognize that this is some work that we're doing on behalf of the industry, and there are costs tied to this project. And so if you have questions about the Sustainability Roadmap project or interest in the project or would consider making a contribution to support this work, I'd love to speak with you. My contact information is on the screen, or you can go to our website, ifeeder.org, and look at the sustainability webpage. I think the parting comments that I would offer is, just as I've talked to the industry members about the Sustainability Roadmap project, I've gotten some really interesting feedback. The fact that the industry really should be supporting this effort because it's a really important piece for us going forward. Just like we talked about today, the fact that sustainability is a must-have. It's not just a nice-to-have. There's really opportunities in the sustainability and climate space for the feed industry, not only to use our data to make improvements in productivity and improvements for our farmers, but the opportunity to use the solutions and talk about the solutions that we bring to really driving change. Within the space, you may be a feed industry member who is multinational and publicly traded and has a sustainability team on your staff. But that doesn't mean that the people that you need information from are, have all the resources and tools that they need to be able to get you the information as you're a downstream participant in one of our upstream feed industry sourcing spots. So there's lots of reasons for us to take on this project. We're really excited to get it underway. And if you have questions, please feel free to reach out. And we look forward to engaging you all soon. Thanks.